Today marking 9 years since the Marikana Massacre, when 44 people were killed by police, 34 killed by police, striking mine workers, 44 in total, the 10 people killed in the run-up to that massacre on the 16th of August. So it was on this day in 2012 when the world watched in horror as those striking miners died in a hail of bullets while being shot at by police. And to date, justice for the families of the victims yet to be realized. This year, 4 police officers acquitted of the death of a mine worker who died in police custody. The Socio Economic Rights Institute says the lack of justice and accountability has compounded the family's trauma and loss. Let's speak to Thato Masiangoako, who is a researcher at the Institute and joins us via our video link. Thato, it's incredibly difficult to believe that it's now 9 years since we all watched in live television as the horror unfolded on that kopi in Marikana.
Absolutely. I think what is more devastating is that the families continue to sit without clear answers as to what happened to their loved ones. It was caught on film. Everyone saw 17 miners get killed at scene 1, and we learned through the Commission of Inquiry that 17 other miners were killed. They were hunted down by the police, pursued and killed, and the families still don't know who's responsible for that. We're yet to see a single prosecution for the deaths on the 16th of August.
So let's talk about the Farlam Commission of Inquiry and the findings that emanated from that inquiry. How far are we in instituting some of the recommendations?
So there were a number of recommendations from the Farlam Commission of Inquiry. One of those were that an expert panel of experts be established to look into public order policing and crowd management, and that was done. There was also a recommendation that investigations be carried out, but of course there were issues around the fact that the Commission of Inquiry report did not set out a timeline. So I think a lot of people would argue that that's why we're sitting 9 years later without a real sense of when this will be brought to a close. But in terms of the expert panel that was established in 2016 in line with the Commission's recommendations, and they completed their report and submitted that in 2018. The Minister of Police only made that public this year in March 2021, shortly after the killing of Mthokozi Sintumba. So we do now have a report on which international and local experts who sat and had to really contemplate what happened at Marikana and how do we prevent something like that happening again. That report, of course, has been made public, but we're yet to see how that's actually being implemented. And that's where we need to see some progress, in addition to the families actually receiving justice through criminal prosecutions.
So yeah, absolutely. Criminal prosecution is one part of receiving justice, finding justice for the families of the victims. In terms of the work that the Socio Economic Rights Institute does, insofar as claiming compensation of the families is concerned, just give us an update on where we are at in terms of compensation. And to be clear, there is no compensation that could make up for what happened 9 years ago.
Absolutely, and I thank you for adding that, because every time we get around to Marikana, there is a fixation on the monetary value that the families have received. We represent the 36 families of the deceased miners, and to date, about 70 million has been paid out to them. That is only one part of the claims that the families have made. Another thing that the families have consistently asked for is an apology. They're yet to receive that. I think we're sitting over 3,000 days past, and they still haven't received an apology. We don't represent the miners who were arrested or injured following the massacre, but what we understand of the claims that they've been paid out is that the miners, if you recall, there were about over 200 miners who were arrested in the immediate aftermath of the massacre. About 20 million has been paid out, compensating them for wrongful arrest. However, the miners, approximately 50 who were seriously injured, some not so seriously injured, those miners have not received a single payout in any kind of way. So we're sitting with a compensation situation that is incomplete in most respects. Like, families are still claiming for constitutional damages, for general damages, and that's really about the trauma that they've suffered. So one of the women who learned of what happened at Marikana when they found out that their loved one had been killed, she collapsed and died instantly as well. And the ripple effects of this massacre continue to be lived out by the families. There have been young people who have killed themselves as a result of what happened to their fathers, and they've died without the clarity, without having what happened at Marikana be laid to rest by having all those held accountable stand before a court of law and account for their actions.
I mean, it's such a difficult thing to digest because the trauma of the day itself is so hard to take in, and then there are all of these ripple effects that you do talk about. And viewing what you've just described in light of government's own commemorations taking place today, we're told some of the widows of the Marikana Massacre will now be transported to Gauteng to attend some kind of government commemoration. It leaves a bitter taste in your mouth, the picture you've just painted, and then a government commemoration of this nature.
Absolutely. And the families have always been open. They will always remain open to participating because what they want is justice and closure. And unfortunately, for the 16th of August to be reduced to a day where, we remember Marikana quite quickly in a flurry, and then we return to our lives as soon as, the end of August comes around. It is devastating. But, for members of the public, I guess, who may struggle with understanding, why Marikana is so significant, why the families, need some kind of justice, we have to understand that the gross misjustice that took place at Marikana can happen again. If such a mistake has not been addressed, if the police are not held sufficiently accountable for those actions, those mistakes are bound to repeat. And what we've seen since 2012 is a police force that has unfortunately continued to act with impunity. The statistics bear it out, where police officers are far more likely to get off scot-free for misconduct and abuse of power. And so it really is in the interest of the general public, for you and me, for the police, for the state, to address what happened in Marikana and for us to move forward.
I mean, for many, it's, as you say, it's a headline every year on the 16th of August. It's a commemoration for government. Perhaps ordinary South Africans will read it in their morning newspapers and remember what happened on this day 9 years ago. And, of course, for the people who were left behind after the massacre in Marikana, this is their daily lives. They are living with the trauma and the repercussions of this day. I mean, you talk about the reasons why it's important is for us to stop this happening again. It may affect the lives of ordinary South Africans insofar as police response is concerned. I mean, paint us that picture of civilians striking for better pay and how it escalated to what is known as the Marikana Massacre.
I think how you've painted it is exactly as it is. And often over the years, I think we've seen the facts get quite muddied. We've seen, the narratives of violence, the narratives of the miners being, irrational, muti-crazed. People take hold and replace what in fact are the facts, which was a labor dispute between an employer and employee, to which the state intervened on behalf of the employer and killed members of the public. And that is egregious. And that is what should worry us all, is how it is that the state and the mine ever got so close, ever got to a place where they could be deciding on how to address a labor dispute. And at the time when the miners were killed, and even in the clash on the 13th, where the miners were in fact peaceful and what we see on the 13th of August, where 3 mine workers were killed along with 2 police officers, and also what happened on the 16th, there was no provocation. The miners may have been armed, but there was no provocation. And in fact, on the 13th, I think you've seen it in various footage of that day, and even on the 16th, the miners try to move as peacefully, try to avoid confrontation, and what they're met with is brutal force. So on the 13th, there was an order for a tear gas canister to, I guess, be set off. And immediately in that aftermath, 3 miners along with 2 police officers were killed. So it is quite disturbing how that got to be, because on the 13th, the police were negotiating with the miners. Mm-hmm. And within an instant, General Mbembe, who was Major General Mbembe, who was engaging the miners at the time, he receives a phone call, and immediately his stance changes. And immediately after that, there's chaos and 5 people are dead. Yeah. On the 16th of August, the day before, the media was told that tomorrow is D-Day. And what did that mean? It meant that the strike would be brought to an end, irrespective of what that cost us. And indeed, on the 16th, 34 people were killed right before our eyes because a decision was taken. And to this day, how those decisions were reached have not ever really been fully disclosed. So it really is, it's a shame that right at the top of police leadership, all the way down to the bottom, there has been a lack of full disclosure, a full openness, full transparency, and full accountability in terms of what happened, what decisions were taken, and why they were taken.
Absolutely. Thato, I want to just ask you one last question, and you've dealt with it throughout our interview this morning, but what does justice look like for the survivors of the Marikana Massacre? Just very quickly for us.
So justice, beyond the compensation, beyond having to deal with the loss of a loved one, it means that those who are responsible for what happened to their loved ones are brought to book. It means that the state offers some kind of repentance, some kind of remorse, and apologizes for what happened. It means that the situation in Marikana and working conditions for which the miners actually put down tools for in 2012, those get addressed. Marikana has to be located within the broader socio-political context in which South Africa rests, where we sit with an economy that, at least in the mining industry, where workers are exploited, where the living conditions are incredibly difficult. Many people who still live in Marikana today can say that, this mine makes lots of money from our labor. And yet it's the communities around those mining towns that bear the brunt of the economic, the ecological degradation that takes place as a result of that. It's the workers who work under very difficult conditions and are not compensated sufficiently for their labor that bear the brunt. And it's an economy that remains skewed. It's an economy that continues to devalue Black life and Black labor and has remained largely unchanged, with the exception of a few politically connected leaders who have obviously escalated and been able to make some money out of what South Africa's economy looks like. So justice is more than just compensation for the families. It's about economic redress. It's about ensuring that the police do not do what they've done in Marikana, that they change sufficiently. And it's about having a state commit to never doing that again. And those are the multiple, I think, phases of justice that we need to remain aware of.
Absolutely. Thato Masiangoako, thanks very much for your time and that incredible analysis and reflection of this day 9 years ago. She's with the Socio Economic Rights Institute, unpacking the Marikana Massacre as we continue to reflect on what happened now almost a decade ago.